appreciate you all being here. Today, actually, let me backtrack. For most of you who know me, I'm Sergeant Anna Gray with the Evansville Police Department. I'm the Public Information Officer. With me today is Sheriff Noah Robinson, and he is going to be talking about the first half of the timeline of the incident that occurred yesterday on Missouri Street. This was a barricaded subject, which turns to an officer-involved shooting. At the very end of our discussion, we will take questions. We will be showing some video as well, so be patient with us while we show those videos, and like I said, at the end, we will take questions, okay? Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. So an unfortunate conclusion to a long day for both the Evansville Police Department, Vanderbilt County Sheriff's Office, and the Indiana State Police, along with our partners at the United States Marshal Service Task Force. Not the outcome we wanted, which ended in the death. Mr. Gary Youngblood Jr., the coroner's office name has just been released. But we did everything possible to avoid his conclusion, and unfortunately Mr. Youngblood's actions did not make a successful outcome possible. So the United States Marshal Service Task Force, which was made up of deputies from the Vanderbilt County Sheriff's Office, along with the Indiana State Police, and then regular Marshal Service deputies, responded or went to 222, that's 222 East Missouri Street yesterday around 11 a.m. and began surveillance looking for Mr. Gary Youngblood Jr., who was wanted on a petition to revoke level 4 possession of methamphetamine, level 4 possession of narcotics, and some misdemeanor warrants as well. A routine warrant service by all accounts, something that we do every single day. However, at noon, when the deputies stepped out to begin their arrest, Mr. Youngblood spotted them and then produced a handgun out the back window and threatened the responding deputies. At that point, we backed off and called for what we call an armored response vehicle for the Sheriff's Office has in their inventory. It was brought down to the scene, and we began issuing challenges into the home over the PA system for Mr. Youngblood to surrender. Other occupants were inside the home, and they came outside and brought into safety. One female remained inside the residence. We continued challenges, and while responding Evansville Police Department officers and additional Vanderbilt County Sheriff deputies along with state troopers responded to set up a perimeter. At one point, Mr. Youngblood yelled from the residence that he was not going to go back to prison and that he was not going to be taken alive. I'm paraphrasing there. He then again displayed a firearm. At 1 p.m., the female that was inside the residence left and confirmed that no one else remained inside the home other than Mr. Youngblood himself. Sheriff's Office negotiators began communicating with Mr. Youngblood around 2 p.m. That continued on for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours. We thought we were making some progress, but just as we thought progress was occurring, we were dealt reversals, and Mr. Youngblood continued to remain inside the residence. It would not obey commands to come out and surrender. At that point, we began introducing chemical munitions inside the residence. Those were in the form of a 40 millimeter, what's sometimes called a grenade launcher. It's a mechanism by introducing non-flammable chemical irritants we could find inside the house, with the goal of making the inside of the home inhospitable, and that he might come out and surrender. He retreated upstairs where the munitions had less of an effect and continued to refute our commands to come outside. At that point, the Evansville Police Department SWAT team responded with their armored response vehicle, which had some additional capabilities that our response vehicle did not. And I will let Sergeant Gray take over the narration from there and talk about where the incident went from that point.
Thank you. One thing also to note, while officers were on the perimeter, the suspect did get on Facebook Live at one point, said he was turning the gas inside the residence on. There was concern that he was going to try to blow up the residence or burn it down. For that reason, the Evansville Fire Department was also called to stage nearby. Officers were actually able to get up to the residence and turn the gas off safely. And at that point, several hours more of negotiations and attempting to get the suspect out to surrender. Unfortunately, he still did not comply, and then chemical munitions were deployed inside the residence from the Evansville SWAT team, the Special Weapons and Tactics team as well. An EPD negotiator also arrived on scene to assist with the Vanderbilt County Sheriff's Office negotiator. Also, we had an EPD drone that was utilized as well. Again, officers attempted for 2 more hours to try to negotiate and the suspect to surrender peacefully, but he still refused to comply. And that is again when chemical munitions were, as mentioned earlier, deployed inside the residence. Officers on the outside of the residence saw the suspect burst through the siding and was partially hanging out of the west side of the house. It appeared that maybe he was trying to get some fresh air because of the chemical munitions that were inside, had been deployed inside. The decision was made to send in a team of EPD SWAT officers to try to take him into custody at that time. Once the SWAT team entered the residence, the suspect moved locations. Officers and deputies on the outside of the residence then saw the suspect brandish a gun in a second-story window on the east side of the home. The suspect also put the gun inside of his mouth. The drone was actually able to record the suspect at the window with the gun in his hand. This is the gun that was recovered at the scene, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a little bit. We'll put it up on the scene or on the screen again here in just a little bit. Officers and deputies on the outside of the residence continued to give loud verbal commands for the suspect to surrender. An officer got on the radio to let SWAT team members who were inside the residence know that the subject had shown a gun and moved away from the window at that time. While the SWAT team was staged at the bottom of the stairwell inside the residence, they could hear the suspect yelling and throwing things around at the top of the stairs. The team stayed at the bottom of the stairs for several minutes and tried to negotiate with the suspect. Eventually, the suspect appeared at the top of the stairwell with a gun in his hand. One of the officers fired a shot at the suspect. The suspect ran away, and the officers ran up the stairway after the suspect. The officers inside the residence at that time lost sight of the suspect once they got up to the top of the stairway. An EPD officer who was on the outside of the residence saw the subject jump out of the second-story window onto a balcony. The officer believed the suspect had the gun in his hand. That officer fired 2 shots at the suspect. The officers on the inside of the residence found the suspect laying on the balcony with the gun still in his hand. The suspect had been shot. Officers pulled the suspect away from the gun. An EPD officer, who is also a medic for our SWAT team, applied a chest seal on the suspect and began life-saving measures until AMR was able to get to the suspect. They also attempted life-saving measures, but unfortunately the suspect did pass away at the scene. We're going to show the video body cam footage. This is actually going to be on the outside of the residence.
Well, you guys keep light on that window, I can see it with the drone, he's still there. Probably left lethal round in this window, he's kind of hanging out here on the east side. Forward picture. They did have a name on it, but they brought it in.
You can hear they're giving verbal commands at the suspect to show his hands. This. That's actually a less lethal round that was deployed.
Hey, inside team, he just showed a gun. Shot fired.
He's hanging off. He's hanging off.
What you're actually seeing, sorry, I thought, what you're actually seeing there, that is the balcony outside of that window that I was referring to with the black roof right there. That's actually, I don't know if you can use that cursor to kind of point at it, but this is the balcony right here. And then at the end, we can play that again. So at that time, we're actually going to play another video here. This is actually going to be, that was the second officer who fired shots at the suspect. This is actually going to be the first officer who was inside the residence with the SWAT team. This is going to be from his perspective here. Outside of this window is where they encountered the suspect on the balcony. And we cut the video off there, and this is where they render first aid to Youngblood at that point. And if you all, this is, so the gun was recovered from the scene. Like I said, the officer saw it in his hand. They moved Youngblood away from the handgun. This is what the officers were presented with. And once the scene was made safe, the gun was collected and brought back to headquarters. This is actually, it was found to be an airsoft gun. But as you can tell, to me, probably to anybody that looks at that, that looks like a real gun. And as noted earlier, when the female in the residence initially came out and spoke with deputies, she stated that he had a real handgun, that he had a handgun inside the house. She believed it was even a 9mm. So for our purposes, he had a real firearm, and this is what he brandished on multiple occasions throughout the incident. An autopsy is going to be scheduled for tomorrow with the Vandenberg County Coroner's Office, and again, Gary Youngblood Jr.'s name has just been released by the Vandenberg County Coroner's Office. We did just confirm with them before the press conference started. The EPD officers involved in the shooting were given 3 days off, which is a normal protocol for officers involved in a shooting or any other critical incident. The peer and family support team services were offered to the officers and their families, and the employee assistance program is another service that is offered to officers who are involved in a shooting or a critical incident. This standoff lasted over 7 hours, although the end goal in this type of situation is to resolve it as peacefully as possible, as Sheriff stated earlier. We do have to take in consideration officer safety. The suspect brandished a gun on multiple occasions throughout the incident, as well as threatened to shoot officers. For over 7 hours, officers from multiple agencies tried to negotiate with the suspect. Non-lethal equipment was also used in hopes to get the suspect to surrender peacefully. And we would like to thank the Vandenberg County Sheriff's Office, the Evansville Fire Department, the Vandenberg County Coroner's Office, the U.S. Marshal Service, along with the task force officers, AMR, and Central Dispatch for their assistance with this incident. Obviously, this was a very long long incident, and, you know, officers needed to be relieved during that time. Officers were still out taking runs during that time, so very, very busy evening. So thank you all for your patience with us as well. There was a lot to filter through. And I can replay both of those videos, again, if you all would like. I know it kind of happened a little bit quickly. We can play those, and then I can take questions after we replay the videos. Does that sound, okay?
Anna and Taylor, can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Play the video of the part with the drone.
Okay.
And kind of
Kind
pause
of walk
and show
through,
them.
okay,
the
sure,
different points
absolutely.
on that.
Yeah, we can kind of slow that down a little
I
bit.
can still see. With the drone now, she's by the same window.
So again, this is the officer who's outside of that, the residence, outside facing the balcony of where the window is.
As long as you guys keep light on that window, I can see him with the drone, he's still there.
And in case you guys can't, if that's too far away, he's got a gun in his mouth currently, is what the officer on the radio traffic is saying right now.
You could probably use a left lethal round in this window, he's kind of hanging out here on the east side.
And this is actually the sheriff's office armored vehicle. Evansville Police we had our armored vehicle out there as well, but as you can see, this is being used for officers to shield themselves and for cover.
Forward, Mitchell.
He did have a handgun in his right hand, is what that said. And again, officers can still see him in the window, and they're giving verbal commands to show his hands. Here's the drone footage. And if we can kind of slow it down here in a minute, zoom it in. So here's the suspect in the window. So this is a less lethal round that is actually fired at the suspect at that time. That's not an actual shot fired. Suspect goes away from the window for a minute. And right there, that in his hand, that's the handgun right there that officers can see in the window.
Hey, inside team, he just showed a gun.
So now what you hear right there, kind of slow it down here just a minute. So when he says inside teams, talking about the SWAT team, who, remember, they are inside the residence at this time. And they said he just showed a gun. He disappears from the window, so now they don't know where he went. And then the first, you can kind of hear it, you hear the first inside shot. Officers on the outside perimeter at that time, they're not sure who actually fired the shot, but they know it came from inside the residence. And then these are the two that were fired from the outside, when the suspect comes through the window onto the balcony and, had the gun in his hand outside on the balcony. And you can see he's moving around on the balcony.
He's hanging off. He's hanging off the.
And then officers come out and render first aid at that time. Do you have any closing comments before questions or anything? Okay, all right, this time, if you all have any questions, we can try to answer your questions.
I want to thank the Evansville Fire Department, repeat that again. We tried every means, conventional and unconventional. At one point, we were shooting water into the residence with the assistance of the Evansville Fire Department. Anything we could do to get him to surrender, but at some point, these residents that had their neighborhood terrorized for 7 hours and couldn't leave their homes or couldn't go about their business. We had to bring this thing to a conclusion. And we gave him as much time as we thought was reasonable. But ultimately, it was his poor decision-making process that led to this outcome. Regrettable as it was, I think it was handled appropriately, and my hats off to the Evansville Police Department for the support they provided us, and the teamwork that went into resolving this with no officers or other civilians being harmed.
So, my question is, why did only one officer fire? We have video, and he appears to have his hands on the door frame, still exiting the window as he was shot. And I was wondering why there was only one officer that fired at him if they thought he was a threat.
Are you talking about inside or outside the residence? I'm not sure
Outside,
what
when he was
video
coming
you're
out of
referring
the
to.
window.
When he was coming outside the
Yeah.
video, okay. Well, that officer perceived him as a threat. He was in a position where he could take the shot, and try to remember there were other officers around. We couldn't get in a crossfire situation. Also, there was officers inside the home as well, that other officers had to take in consideration where their shot was going. We also had to consider the neighboring houses. So at that time, that officer felt like he was a threat and took a shot, and other officers may not have had that opportunity or, had the means to shoot without injuring or, hurting someone else or shooting into the house directly.
Was it a rifle or a handgun? Just a curiosity.
Sure, it was a handgun, but it was an airsoft pistol is what it was.
I mean, what the officer used.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what the inside officer had at this time, but the officer that shot from the outside, it was a rifle.
Now, I know in the drone footage, we see the gun flash in the window on that side part of the house. When he exits the window, did he have that gun on him, that airsoft gun?
Yes, he did. It was found in his hand. Actually, when officers peeked out the window at him, it was in his hand. For purposes of not being able to show that, it's very sensitive in nature. But yes, we do have that.
This was inside city limits. Could you help for our viewers understand, at what point did Vanderbilt County Sheriff's officers become involved?
So this was originally a United States Marshal Service Task Force incident. We have sheriff deputies assigned to the task force, as do the state police. And so it was the sheriff's office that was initially responding to this and trying to serve this warrant. And then the Evansville Police Department was brought in when we know we needed additional logistical as well as manpower to help bring the situation to a close.
Now, you said that there were times where you thought you made progress with Youngblood and then it backfired or you took 2 steps back. Can you give me some details of what those incidents were?
Yeah, the negotiator spent a long time talking to him on the phone. It was hampered by the type of phone that he had. He would periodically lose the connection, have to call 911 himself, and then allow us to reestablish the connection. But we, at one point, were talking back and forth with him, and anytime you have a suspect who's talking to you, the potential for a peaceful resolution exists. The playbook normally, when no one else's life is in danger, is to let this thing play out for as long as possible. But at some point, he just didn't want to negotiate anymore. So he gave us some indications, asking for food and having some general rapport, while not always good, having some rapport with the negotiator, but gave us some reason to believe that we could make progress toward a peaceful conclusion. But as the evening grew later, that all but evaporated.
Was this ever considered a hostage situation?
No.
The negotiator, did they have credentials involving mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment? Because a warrant for meth possession was being served. So did they have experience or consult anyone with experience in drug addiction?
Well, the purpose of the negotiation was not to have a discussion about his addiction. The purpose was, and sole purpose, was to arrive at a peaceful surrender. And our negotiators are highly trained and are credentialed in that respect. No, we weren't engaging with him, attempting to have some kind of a counseling session over the phone. The sole goal of the negotiator is to get the person to peaceably surrender, and that is our only concern when a negotiation is occurring.
What was the age of the suspect?
37.
One of our photographers saw some may have been his family members coming outside. Were any of his family members arrested during this incident?
No one else was arrested.
Okay.
There was a female early on that came out of the residence, and then after that, no one else came out.
How
No
many
one else
people-
was inside.
How many people did end up coming out of the house, and were there any injuries or home damage or anything like that? But besides Youngblood himself?
Sure, I think I misunderstood.
Sorry,
Did you say any
well,
other,
most of them-
yeah, no problem, any other
How many
injuries?
people came out of that house aside from him? And were there any injuries or any other injuries or property damage, anything like that?
Gotcha. Yeah, so the initial female that came out of the house, is, to my knowledge, she is the only other
It was,
person that was inside.
there were 3 to 4, I'm gonna say 3 to 5 individuals who
Oh,
came out
five
initially.
individuals.
Yeah, it's a confusing incident, a lot of things happening here, so. 3 to 5 individuals that initially came out of the home, leaving behind 1 female, and she came out a little bit later on, I believe around 1 p.m., leaving only him within the residence.
No other injuries or property damage or anything like that?
The home was extensively damaged.
I mean, yeah, that one was, sure.
This was for the level 4 felony warrant, right? Would, if he hadn't shown the gun, would this have gone the same way of the armored vehicles and the additional help, or would the gun escalate the situation?
His decision to point a gun at us escalated the situation considerably. We could not risk sending a team in there that without adequate preparation and giving him a chance to peaceably surrender. We wanted to give him every opportunity to surrender before we took actions that might increase the risk of someone getting hurt. But it was his decision to display a firearm and point it at law enforcement that resulted in this outcome.
On scene, you can hear negotiators talking all day long with him, trying to establish that rapport, like you said. In that last hour or two, was there still something there? Did he go silent on his end?
Communications really broke down during that last. That was part of the decision to go ahead and take some actions, because we were willing to let this thing play out for as long as necessary, as we thought we had rapport and communication. But once we lost that, we had to take other steps. We had to return that neighborhood back to the residents that lived there.
When you established the perimeter, did you evacuate the homes that were, that's a pretty packed neighborhood, right? I mean, houses are pretty shoulder to shoulder. Did you move neighbors out of their homes during it?
We notified everyone in the area that they should evacuate. We don't have the authority to force someone to evacuate. We were confident that we had that house contained with eyes on it, so we weren't worried about the suspect escaping. But yeah, errant rounds being fired by him were a concern of ours, and we of course made all the other residents that was a risk, and should they choose to remain behind, then that was at their own risk.
Is the gas a concern for your neighbors too? I don't know how far it traveled.
You said the natural gas in the home we shut
No,
off.
well, no, the gas munitions that were,
No,
No.
it's a concern. They don't pose any danger to anyone's health, but they're very unpleasant to be in a confined area, which is why they're shot inside of a
What
house.
type of gas was it?
A variety of gases. I know some of them included pepper ball style gas, CS gas, as well as some other gases. None of them are life-threatening, but they're designed to be a chemical irritant to your mucous membranes and make being in a room where it's deployed very unpleasant.
A resident of that house told us she had several pets in the basement, and we later saw animal control at the scene. Did the pets survive the gas?
Yes.
I wanted to ask, a lot of the procedures here look similar to other standoffs we've seen before. What made this unique?
I think if I had to, and Anna may have a slightly different take, I think the uniqueness in this was to my knowledge, one of the only times we deployed water in an attempt to get someone to come out. But it just kind of shows the level of, I'm not going to say desperate, but we were definitely thinking outside the box, and we had to try to find something that would work. And so that was unique in this instance. But beyond that, this is something that the Evansville Police Department handles quite frequently, and us to a lesser extent, but it's unfortunately relatively common.
These situations can certainly be long, but time, unless it turns into an active threat situation, time is on our side most of the time. I mean, we've got time, we've got resources, and that is why we bring in, the special weapons and equipment that we do have to try to resolve it and to try to, like you said, think outside the box. So certainly this one lasted a lot longer than most of them do. But we certainly have seen these, last a long time. I think sometimes people are just scared. They don't want to come out, but then once we're there for a long time, that's why we have the negotiators, and once we can actually talk to them. But, like he was saying earlier, once communication stops and we realize they're not interested in hearing what we have to say, and they're not interested in cooperating, that does change things too.
Can you say more about his charges, what that actually means? The meth-related charges, or what he was being served for?
Yeah, he violated the terms of his release, his probation. And so this likely would have meant him returning or going to prison. A level 4 felony for possession of methamphetamine along with narcotics, which I don't know if that was heroin or what the underlying possession charge that resulted in that. But yeah, he was looking at potentially going back to prison.
Since this was within city limits, why was the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office working with the U.S. Marshals as a
this whole ordeal, you'll see law enforcement kind of work their way up and then kind of back off. During that, I asked him kind of what that procedure is, and then during that time, was he showing them the gun? Could they get eyes on him, and they were kind of approaching and then backing up every once in a while?
Throughout the period that we were there, he would periodically display the weapons through the window, or as you saw later on, hanging out the window. So yeah, we weren't going to approach the residents until we reached a last resort kind of situation because of displaying that handgun.
And just kind of onto that, at the time when the SWAT team entered the residence, he was hanging out of the siding of the house. He had made like a hole in the siding and was like hanging out, so officers had visual on him at that time. Unfortunately, once they actually entered the residence, he was able to get out of that, and then he basically ran to the other side of the house, and then they saw him in the window. So, that was when they tried to take advantage of that situation tactfully, knowing that they had eyes on him for at least a short period of time, so.
When he was hanging out, was he trying to communicate at all, or was he just literally, like you said, trying to get fresh air, it looked like?
Yeah, I think he was just getting fresh air. Officers were trying to communicate with him and giving him verbal commands, and they were talking to him, but I don't really think there was any communicating on his end coming back, so. At one point, and I do want to add this, I'm not sure if we mentioned this, at one point a ladder was actually utilized and put up at that area so that giving him an option, come down, here's a way to get out. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he even pushed the ladder away, so.
Was it at that hole he had made?
I believe that was, and that, I think he tried to make several, but in the hole in that siding where he was coming out, yeah.
Was he a proper resident of that address?
I don't have that information at this time, I'm not sure, yeah.
Were there any other firearms in the house?
I'm not sure on that. I'm
Okay.
sure they probably did a search warrant, a follow-up, that would be something we'll follow up on that.
Okay.
What was the actual address?
It's 222 East Missouri Street.
Is the rest of the family members or individuals that may have lived there, I'm assuming they're displaced at this time? Because it's a crime scene?
Yeah, our EPD detectives are talking to them, and liaisoning with them, and trying to find a solution to that. Thanks for being here,
Thank you
guys.
all.
Appreciate that. Thank you.